In an age where superstition shaped medicine and fear controlled the sick, a single mind would rise to challenge everything the world believed. His name was Abu Bakr Al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, a man whose commitment to truth would reshape the very foundation of science. Long before hospitals embraced evidence, long before doctors trusted experiments, Al-Razi stood alone and declared that illness was not a curse, not a punishment, and not a shadow of demons, but a natural process that could be studied, understood, and treated. He was born in Rayy, a thriving Persian city filled with traders, philosophers, and wandering storytellers. As a young man, Al-Razi was surrounded by a world where magic was medicine and superstition passed for wisdom. People believed diseases came from evil spirits. Cures were written as charms. Astrology was treated as science, and no one dared to question the traditions that kept the sick in darkness. But Al-Razi's mind was not like the minds around him. He questioned everything, every belief, every claim, every superstition. He demanded proof. He wanted results that could be repeated, not rituals that depended on faith. Even as a young scholar, he was known for challenging teachers who couldn't explain the reasoning behind their teachings. To him, knowledge meant nothing unless it was tested, measured, and proven. At first, he pursued music and philosophy. But as he grew older, he witnessed firsthand the suffering caused by ignorance in medicine. He watched people die from infections that could be treated, from diseases misunderstood, from remedies based on fear rather than logic. And that is when Al-Razi turned toward medicine, determined to understand the human body through observation instead of blind tradition. He traveled to Baghdad, the intellectual capital of the world, home of the legendary House of Wisdom. Here he studied chemistry, mathematics, and philosophy, blending them into a new scientific approach no one had ever seen before. Baghdad had the greatest libraries of the age, filled with knowledge from Greece, India, Persia, and beyond. But even there, superstition was deeply rooted in medicine. Most physicians still believed the stars controlled human health. Many treatments came from magical thinking rather than evidence. Al-Razi refused to accept it. He began performing his own experiments, documenting every result carefully. He studied fevers, infections, eye diseases, and childhood illnesses, observing patterns that others ignored. Unlike most physicians of his time, he insisted on clinical examination, case notes, and comparative testing of treatments. And slowly, his reputation grew. Patients traveled from across the empire to seek the doctor who relied on science instead of spells. His breakthrough came when he began writing his early medical works, challenging long-held beliefs that diseases were supernatural. He argued that illnesses came from natural causes, bad air, contaminated water, poor hygiene, and imbalances in the body. This bold idea changed everything. It meant that diseases could be understood, prevented, and cured. Al-Razi was no longer just a physician. He became the first great scientific hero of medicine, a man who stood against superstition with nothing but observation, logic, and an unshakable belief that reason would win. As Al-Razi's curiosity deepened, so did his mastery. In Baghdad, he immersed himself in the latest medical texts from Greece and India, but he refused to treat them as sacred. Where Hippocrates and Galen were revered as untouchable authorities, Al-Razi examined their claims with the same skepticism he applied to superstition. If an idea failed when tested on real patients, he discarded it, regardless of its author's reputation. This single choice separated him from every physician of his generation. While others memorized ancient theories, Al-Razi collected data. He compared symptoms between patients, documented how illnesses progressed, and noted which treatments helped and which harmed. These records became the foundation of his approach to medicine, objective, organized, and relentlessly practical. As his reputation grew, the Caliphal authorities appointed him the chief physician of the Baghdad hospital, one of the most advanced medical centers in the world. It was here that Al-Razi made one of his most groundbreaking innovations, a systematic method of patient care. Instead of relying on tradition, he categorized diseases by observation. He separated fevers from infections, nerve disorders from digestive issues, and childhood illnesses from adult conditions. Every patient received care tailored to their symptoms, not a generic remedy or magical formula. His methods were so effective that the hospital became a model for future institutions across the Islamic world and beyond. Physicians began studying under him, copying his techniques, and following his standards of clinical precision. For the first time in history, medicine started to resemble a science instead of a collection of inherited rituals. But Al-Razi's boldest moment came when he confronted one of the greatest misconceptions of the ancient world: the belief that smallpox and measles were the same disease. For centuries, physicians confused the two, treating them with identical methods despite their very different symptoms. Al-Razi challenged this confusion head-on. Through detailed case studies, he observed the progression of each illness, their rashes, fevers, stages, and survival rates. Then he made a declaration that stunned the medical community. Smallpox and measles are distinct diseases. This insight revolutionized treatment and saved countless lives. His book on the subject became one of the most widely read medical texts in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. Al-Razi's success, however, did not come without resistance. Many traditional healers accused him of arrogance for questioning ancient authorities. Some claimed he was dishonoring centuries of medical wisdom, but Al-Razi refused to yield. His loyalty was not to tradition. It was to truth, to evidence, and to the people whose lives depended on it. As he continued to challenge old ideas, his influence spread far beyond Baghdad. His students carried his methods across the empire, teaching a new generation of physicians how to observe, record, and test. Slowly, a new kind of medicine began to take shape, one grounded not in superstition, but in the disciplined search for understanding. And at the center of this transformation stood Al-Razi, the physician who believed that knowledge must continually evolve, or it becomes another form of ignorance. With his reputation firmly established, Al-Razi turned toward something far more ambitious than treating illness. He wanted to transform the way humanity understood knowledge itself. In his view, medicine could not rely on stories or inherited wisdom. It needed structure, consistency, and a method that separated truth from error. Long before the world had a term like scientific method, Al-Razi was already building one. He began by insisting that every treatment must be tested on real patients and that the results must be written down honestly, even if the outcome contradicted accepted medical theory. He warned young physicians that repeating old ideas without examination was nothing more than intellectual laziness. To him, every hypothesis was temporary, every cure was a question, and every conclusion demanded continuous review. This discipline shaped his medical rounds. Each morning, he walked the hospital corridors with students trailing behind him, carrying writing tablets. Al-Razi paused at each bed, observed every detail, asked questions, and dictated notes. Fever patterns, appetite changes, the color of the skin, the patient's emotional state. Nothing was dismissed as trivial. Illness became a puzzle, not a mystery. Patterns emerged, connections formed, and new insights rose from careful attention rather than ancient authority. These rounds produced hundreds of documented cases, forming a medical record system far ahead of its time. Through them, Al-Razi recognized subtle differences between diseases that other physicians treated as identical. He noted how environmental conditions could trigger outbreaks. He tracked the effects of treatments over days and weeks, identifying what truly worked and what merely appeared to work because of coincidence or tradition. But what truly set him apart was his willingness to admit uncertainty. In a world that valued confident declarations, Al-Razi argued that a physician's first responsibility was honesty. If a diagnosis was unclear, he said so. If a cure was uncertain, he documented the doubt. This humility, rare in any era, became the foundation of a more honest approach to medical science. As his methods evolved, Al-Razi turned to experimentation. He tested chemicals, minerals, and herbal mixtures in controlled ways, recording their effects with precision. He introduced new instruments into medical practice, including tools adapted from alchemy and chemistry. He studied how heat, cold, moisture, and dryness affected the body, not through philosophy but through direct measurement. His success drew attention from scholars far outside medicine. Philosophers, chemists, and mathematicians visited him to witness this new style of thinking, one grounded in observation rather than assumption. Even skeptics admitted that his methods produced results they could not deny. Yet Al-Razi's pursuit of truth placed him in tension with those who believed medicine should remain as it was, traditional, ancient, unchanging. Rumors spread that he was undermining established wisdom. Some accused him of arrogance. Others feared that questioning long-held beliefs could unravel the very foundation of knowledge. But Al-Razi was unmoved. He believed that reason was a gift meant to be used, not ignored, and he believed that to serve humanity, a physician must confront error, whether that error came from superstition or from the writings of respected masters. His work marked a turning point. For the first time, medicine began shifting from a collection of rituals into a disciplined craft grounded in evidence. And as more students embraced his methods, the movement grew. Hospitals changed. Treatments changed. Expectations changed. In the heart of Baghdad, one man quietly reshaped the intellectual future of the world, not through miracles, but through clarity, courage, and the conviction that truth must be earned through proof. As Al-Razi's methods matured, he encountered challenges that would intimidate even the most confident physicians of his age. Hospitals were crowded with patients carrying illnesses no one fully understood. Fevers swept through cities, leaving fear in their wake. Diseases appeared suddenly, without warning, and spread through neighborhoods with terrifying speed. Most healers responded by retreating to superstition, seeking blessings, charms, or astrological readings to explain the chaos. Al-Razi chose a different path. He met the unknown head-on, refusing to be intimidated by what others considered mysterious or supernatural. Where others saw curses, he saw patterns. Where others expected omens, he searched for causes. And where others invoked the stars, he studied the environment, the air, the water, the living conditions around each patient. He famously stated that fear itself was one of the greatest amplifiers of disease, a bold claim for his time. To counter that fear, he sought to replace mystery with understanding. Whenever he encountered a symptom he had never seen before, he did not hide it or react with panic. Instead, he approached it with curiosity, documenting every sign and cross-referencing it with past cases. He believed that no illness was beyond comprehension if studied carefully enough. This mindset allowed him to recognize patterns that others overlooked. He observed how certain diseases spread faster in humid areas, how contaminated water caused stomach ailments, how crowded living conditions fueled outbreaks. These observations were early steps toward a deeper understanding of epidemiology, centuries before the field had a name. But perhaps the clearest example of his courage emerged during one of Baghdad's feared epidemics. When a violent fever swept through the city, many healers fled, believing the disease carried a supernatural curse. Al-Razi stayed. Day after day, he moved through packed hospital wards, examining patients one by one, searching for clues. He inspected the air, compared symptoms, tested treatments, and documented the results in meticulous detail. His willingness to remain present, even in the face of danger, transformed him into a symbol of rationality. For the sick, he brought hope. For physicians, he demonstrated leadership. And for the city, he embodied the idea that knowledge, not fear, offered the strongest protection. During this period, Al-Razi's writings expanded rapidly. He produced detailed manuals describing the symptoms of dozens of diseases, the effects of medicines, and the proper ways to treat wounds, infections, fractures, and burns. His books did not rely on grand philosophical theories. Instead, they were filled with simple, precise, and practical observations drawn from real cases. One of his most important works, Al-Hawi, later translated into Latin as The Comprehensive Book, became the foundation of practical medicine in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. It was not a book of mystical secrets. It was a collection of raw, honest data, case studies, and experiments. Doctors who had never seen Baghdad, never met Al-Razi, never walked his hospital halls, would one day use his writings to heal patients thousands of miles away. Al-Razi's influence grew so wide that he began receiving students from across the empire. Young physicians traveled long distances to learn his methods, eager to break free from the constraints of superstition. He taught them that a physician's first responsibility was not to tradition, but to observation, not to authority, but to evidence, and above all, not to fear, but to understanding. This philosophy reshaped the identity of the physician. Instead of being a keeper of rituals, the physician became a seeker of truth, a person who questioned, investigated, and learned from every patient. In a world where the unknown inspired dread, Al-Razi transformed it into a source of discovery. He proved that knowledge could conquer fear. He demonstrated that clear thinking could defeat superstition. And he showed that courage, when paired with reason, could illuminate even the darkest corners of human understanding. As Al-Razi's influence spread, his curiosity pushed him into new scientific territory. He believed that medicine could advance only through experimentation, controlled, repeatable, and free from the influence of myths. While most physicians relied on inherited recipes, Al-Razi began testing individual ingredients, one by one, to understand their true effects on the body. This approach was unheard of. It marked a shift from traditional healing to empirical science. He set up a small laboratory inside the hospital, filled with glass vessels, distillation devices, mineral samples, and herbal extracts. He borrowed techniques from alchemists, chemists, and perfumers, adapting their tools for medical research. Here he tested substances in varying quantities to determine which were toxic, which soothed pain, and which promoted healing. He studied how heat transformed compounds, how evaporation separated elements, and how distillation purified liquids. His experiments yielded some of the earliest documented pharmaceutical preparations in history. But he did not stop at medicines. Al-Razi also investigated how the environment influenced human health. He placed bowls of water around hospital rooms to observe how quickly they evaporated, gathering clues about humidity levels and air quality. He burned various woods and herbs to test their effect on breathing. He compared recovery times between patients who rested near fresh airflow and those in stagnant rooms. From these observations, he developed the principle that clean, circulating air was essential for healing, a concept now fundamental to modern hospitals. One of his most iconic experiments involved selecting the site for a new hospital. When the caliph asked him to choose the best location in Baghdad, Al-Razi did not consult astrologers or rely on tradition. Instead, he hung pieces of fresh meat across different neighborhoods and waited. After several days, he inspected the meat to see where it decayed the least. He reasoned that the area with the slowest decay had the healthiest air, and therefore the best environment for the sick. This experiment astonished the officials, but it became a symbol of his philosophy: logic over superstition, evidence over guesswork. His boldness extended into his writing. In several works, Al-Razi openly criticized physicians who clung to untested remedies and superstitions. He argued that treating patients based on unproven ideas was not only unscientific, but unethical. A doctor, he said, must be willing to challenge their own assumptions, admit their mistakes, and adapt their methods as new evidence emerges. This mindset placed him centuries ahead of his time. Embodying a scientific spirit the world would not fully embrace until the Renaissance. As he conducted experiments, Al-Razi also made groundbreaking observations about the human body. He recorded the first clinical description of kidney stones, noting their symptoms and the importance of hydration. He distinguished between different types of headaches, including those caused by tension, inflammation, and digestive issues. He studied eye diseases, skin conditions, and nerve disorders, attributing each to natural causes rather than supernatural forces. His approach to surgery was equally revolutionary. He insisted that surgeons must understand anatomy thoroughly before attempting any procedure. He documented methods for treating fractures, dislocations, and wounds with precision, and he encouraged the use of pain-relieving substances, an early nod toward the development of anesthetics. Yet perhaps his greatest advancement came in his emphasis on patient ethics. Al-Razi believed that compassion was more important than prestige. He warned physicians against showing irritation toward the suffering, against boasting, and against placing their reputation above the well-being of patients. He insisted that every doctor, no matter how knowledgeable, must remain humble before the complexity of the human body. His students described him as a physician who listened more than he spoke, who examined carefully before prescribing, and who treated the poor with the same dedication as he treated the wealthy. To Al-Razi, every life had equal value and every patient deserved dignity. Through his experiments, his ethics, and his relentless pursuit of truth, Al-Razi laid the foundation for a new era of medical science. He replaced superstition with observation, myth with measurement, and fear with understanding. And in doing so, he reshaped medicine not just for his generation, but for every generation that followed. As Al-Razi's authority grew, so did the demand for his writings. Scholars, physicians, and students across the Islamic world begged him to record the principles that guided his work. What followed was one of the greatest literary achievements in medical history, a collection of books so comprehensive, so practical, and so revolutionary that they reshaped both Eastern and Western medicine for centuries. His most monumental creation was Al-Hawi, known in Latin as the Comprehensive Book. Unlike traditional medical texts that repeated older theories, Al-Razi designed Al-Hawi as a living encyclopedia. He filled it with case studies, detailed symptom descriptions, treatment outcomes, and corrected mistakes from earlier physicians. In its pages, he documented diseases of the lungs, stomach, nerves, skin, and blood with a clarity unmatched by any writer before him. What made Al-Hawi truly extraordinary was its honesty. Al-Razi did not hide his failures. He recorded cases where treatments did not work, where a diagnosis proved wrong, or where an outcome was uncertain. He believed that medicine could advance only if physicians confronted their errors and learned from them. This level of transparency set a new standard for medical writing, one that modern scientific journals strive to follow even today. His second masterpiece, Al-Kitab al-Mansuri, offered a more structured and accessible overview of medical knowledge. Divided into 10 volumes, it covered everything from anatomy and physiology to hygiene, diet, and disease prevention. It became a required text in hospitals and learning centers throughout the Muslim world. When translated into Latin, it became a cornerstone of European medical education for more than 400 years. Another influential work, Al-Jadari wa al-Hasba, offered the first clear distinction between smallpox and measles, a discovery that revolutionized treatment and epidemiology. Through careful observation, Al-Razi described the unique symptoms of each disease, their progression, and their differing impacts on the body. His work saved countless lives, especially in regions where outbreaks were common and often deadly. But Al-Razi's contributions extended far beyond disease classification. In his writings on pharmacology, he cataloged hundreds of medicines, explaining their uses, effects, and risks with remarkable precision. He warned against using treatments that lacked evidence and encouraged physicians to tailor remedies to the individual patient. This focus on personalized medicine was centuries ahead of its time. He also wrote extensively on child health, becoming one of the earliest physicians to treat pediatrics as a distinct field. He documented differences in anatomy, immunity, and physiology between children and adults, rejecting the idea that children were merely small adults. His recommendations on nutrition, hygiene, and early disease intervention helped reduce childhood mortality in an age when such deaths were tragically common. Yet perhaps the most groundbreaking aspect of his writing was his belief that medicine must evolve. He argued that no text, no matter how respected, should be treated as final or perfect. In a bold move, he openly criticized some of the most revered medical figures of the ancient world, including Galen. While he respected their contributions, he believed that truth must outrank authority. If observations contradicted the teachings of Galen, then Galen must be corrected, not worshipped. This attitude ignited controversy among traditionalists, who viewed ancient scholars as infallible. But Al-Razi refused to compromise. His loyalty was to evidence, not tradition. His commitment was to healing, not to intellectual comfort. And his courage to challenge accepted wisdom paved the way for generations of scientific advancement. The legacy of his books stretched far beyond his lifetime. When European scholars encountered his works during the Middle Ages, they were astonished by the precision and depth of his knowledge. His writings were copied into medical libraries across Italy, France, and Spain. In some universities, Al-Hawi became the primary medical reference for students, outlasting countless other texts. Through his books, Al-Razi achieved something remarkable. He made his mind immortal. His observations, experiments, and ethical principles survived wars, political upheaval, and the passage of centuries. And even today, fragments of his methods live on in modern clinical practice, in the emphasis on evidence, the use of case documentation, the importance of ethics, and the belief that medicine must always evolve. As Al-Razi's writings spread across the Muslim world, they inspired admiration in many, but unease in others. His insistence on evidence over tradition placed him in direct conflict with those who relied on superstition, magical thinking, and inherited beliefs. For centuries, people had sought cures through rituals, charms, and astrological predictions. Al-Razi dismissed these practices with unwavering determination. To him, anything that could not be tested, measured, or observed had no place in medicine. This bold stance earned him both respect and opposition. Physicians who relied on astrology accused him of arrogance. Traditional healers claimed he was abandoning ancient wisdom. But Al-Razi stood firm. He argued that superstition was not harmless, it was dangerous. It misled the sick, delayed treatment, and gave false hope. He insisted that physicians had a moral obligation to pursue truth, even when that truth challenged familiar beliefs. One of his most controversial arguments concerned the use of astrological charts to diagnose illness. In his time, many doctors believed the position of planets influenced human health. Patients would not undergo treatment unless the stars were aligned, but Al-Razi rejected this entirely. He wrote that the movements of distant celestial bodies had no measurable effect on disease. Illness, he said, came from the body itself, from infection, imbalance, environment, and lifestyle. This idea was radical. It stripped away centuries of superstition and demanded a new way of thinking, one based on natural causes rather than mystical ones. And Al-Razi did not stop there. He criticized healers who claimed to cure through charms or whispered incantations. He warned people not to confuse coincidence with cure, not to trust stories over evidence. Through clinical examples, he showed that many so-called miraculous recoveries were simply the body healing itself. Superstition, he argued, took credit for what nature accomplished on its own. His sharp critiques stirred controversy, but they also drew attention to the dangers of untested remedies. In one of his writings, he told the story of a patient who delayed treatment while pursuing magical cures. By the time the patient returned, the disease had advanced beyond help. Al-Razi used this tragedy as a lesson. Ignorance could kill, but knowledge could save. His stance created tension in Baghdad. Some scholars admired his courage, others feared his influence. A few publicly debated him, hoping to undermine his authority. But Al-Razi never responded with anger. Instead, he responded with reason. He invited his critics to present evidence, to test their claims scientifically, and to submit their theories to experimentation. None accepted the challenge. For Al-Razi, the real enemy was not tradition. It was the refusal to question tradition. His pursuit of truth extended into philosophy, where he argued that human intellect was one of the greatest gifts given to mankind. He believed that reason was a tool meant to be used, not feared. He encouraged people to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and think for themselves. This philosophy echoed through his medical teachings, shaping a generation of physicians who valued curiosity over conformity. But his views came at a price. Some conservative scholars grew suspicious of his boldness. They accused him of undermining established authorities. They questioned his critiques of ancient writers and claimed he was overstepping his role as a physician. Despite these attacks, Al-Razi refused to retreat. His loyalty remained with the patients who depended on accurate knowledge, not with those who sought comfort in outdated ideas. In the face of resistance, he held to a simple principle: truth does not fear investigation. This sentence became a quiet revolution. It empowered physicians to question, to experiment, and to rely on observation instead of superstition. It inspired scholars to adopt a more rational approach to natural science. And it planted the seeds for a world where knowledge was valued not for its age, but for its accuracy. Through his courage, Al-Razi became more than a physician. He became a symbol of reason, proof that the human mind could rise above fear and ignorance. And in doing so, he led medicine out of the shadows and into the light of inquiry. As Al-Razi's fame spread across the Islamic world, students began traveling long distances just to learn at his side. They came from Persia, Syria, Mesopotamia, and even distant lands beyond the Caliphate. What drew them was not just his knowledge, it was his method. Al-Razi did not teach by lecturing from old books. He taught by demonstrating how to think. His classroom was not a typical lecture hall. It was the hospital floor. His students walked beside him on his daily rounds, observing as he examined patients, asked questions, and dictated detailed notes. Al-Razi insisted that every student learn the art of observation long before touching a medicine jar. He believed that mistakes came from assumptions, and he demanded that his students rely on their eyes, their ears, and their intellect, not on inherited theories. Instead of memorization, he encouraged debate. A student who disagreed with him was not punished. He was invited to explain his reasoning. If his explanation was strong, Al-Razi praised him. If it was weak, Al-Razi guided him carefully to a better conclusion. This teaching style was revolutionary in a world where many scholars taught by reciting ancient texts without question. To train a physician, he said, one must train a mind. His students recorded some of his sayings in their notebooks, wisdom that still resonates today. A doctor must understand the patient, not just the disease. The best physician is the one who admits what he does not know. Knowledge grows by questioning everything, including oneself. These principles shaped a new generation of medical thinkers. Under Al-Razi's guidance, they became investigators, not imitators. They documented their own case studies, compared results, and built upon his methods. Many of these students later became celebrated physicians, spreading his influence across the Islamic world, from Cairo to Cordoba. As his school expanded, Al-Razi introduced organized lectures that drew enormous audiences. Philosophers, mathematicians, and theologians often attended simply to hear how he approached a question. They admired the clarity of his reasoning. Even those who disagreed with his views respected the discipline of his method. His lectures blended logic, ethics, and practical knowledge in a way few had ever heard. But Al-Razi's teaching extended beyond medicine. He wrote treatises on philosophy, chemistry, and ethics. He taught his students how to purify chemicals, how to distill liquids, and how to identify minerals. He explained the nature of heat, the behavior of gases, and the properties of acids and alkalis. These lessons shaped early chemistry and laid groundwork for later scientific advancements. He also emphasized the importance of professional ethics. He taught his students that a physician must treat every patient with dignity, regardless of wealth, faith, or social status. He reminded them that illness humbles all people equally, and the physician's role was to restore dignity as well as health. Stories spread of Al-Razi giving free treatment to the poor, visiting the homes of those who could not travel, and spending his own money on medicines when the hospital could not afford them. But his rise as a master teacher was not without challenges. His criticism of established authorities made him a target for conservative scholars. Some accused him of promoting arrogance in his students by encouraging them to question tradition. Others feared that his scientific approach would weaken old intellectual hierarchies. Yet despite these pressures, his classes remained full. His students saw him not as a rebel, but as a mentor who freed their minds from limitation. One of his most enduring legacies came from a simple rule he imposed on all who studied under him: write everything down. A physician's memory, he said, could fail, but written records preserved truth for future generations. This principle, now standard in modern medicine, was one of his greatest gifts to the medical world. By the time he reached the height of his career, Al-Razi had trained an entire generation of rational thinkers. His students carried his methods to distant lands, establishing hospitals, writing books, and teaching others the power of observation. Through them, his influence spread far beyond the borders of Persia and Baghdad. Al-Razi did not merely treat patients. He transformed minds. He built a new approach to learning, one that valued evidence, honesty, and the courage to question. And through his students, the light he ignited continued to spread, illuminating the future of science. As Al-Razi's reputation grew, so too did his responsibilities. The caliphs, impressed by his brilliance and integrity, appointed him to lead several of the most important hospitals in the Islamic world. Under his guidance, Medical care was transformed from a scattered collection of rooms into an organized, efficient, and humane system, something the world had never seen before. When he assumed leadership of the Baghdad Muqtadari Hospital, one of the largest institutions of its time, Al-Razi immediately introduced structural reforms. He reorganized patient wards based on disease type, separating those with infections from those recovering from injuries. He insisted that children be placed in separate units with gentler care, and he created dedicated spaces for eye diseases, digestive disorders, and surgical recovery. This clear separation reduced cross-infection and improved patient outcomes, anticipating modern hospital design by 1,000 years. Al-Razi also organized a rotation system for physicians. Every doctor had assigned hours for rounds, consultations, and rest. He believed that a fatigued physician was a dangerous one. This structure ensured that patients were never left unattended and that doctors had the clarity needed to make sound decisions. One of his most forward-thinking reforms involved medical records. Whereas previous hospitals relied on oral communication, Al-Razi enforced mandatory documentation for every patient. He ordered physicians to write daily notes, track symptoms, record treatments, and list outcomes. These notes became a patient's medical history, accessible to any physician who took over their care. Through this system, mistakes were reduced, continuity improved, and learning expanded. He also established rules for cleanliness. Floors were scrubbed regularly, linens changed, and instruments washed between uses, practices common today but revolutionary in his era. He understood that sanitation saved lives long before the discovery of microbes. These standards became the foundation of hospital hygiene across the Islamic world. But Al-Razi's leadership was not limited to administration. He believed strongly in supporting the poor. In his hospitals, wealthy patients were charged for their care, while the poor received treatment for free. The payments from the wealthy helped fund food, medicines, and salaries. He considered this not charity but a social obligation, an early form of public health care. To ensure fairness, Al-Razi appointed inspectors, trusted individuals who evaluated whether each patient was receiving proper care. These inspectors reported directly to him, bypassing doctors who might hide their mistakes. If the inspectors noted neglect, Al-Razi took action immediately. He believed that leadership demanded accountability, not comfort. He also introduced an innovative outpatient system. Patients with minor illnesses could visit the hospital without being admitted. They received examinations, medicines, and instructions before returning home. This reduced overcrowding and ensured that beds were available for severe cases. The idea of outpatient care, a cornerstone of modern health systems, originated with him. But perhaps the most surprising innovation came from his financial management. Al-Razi developed a balanced budget system, calculating the cost of food, medicine, supplies, and labor for each hospital. By tracking expenses and comparing them against patient counts, he created one of the earliest examples of healthcare accounting. His financial reports became models for hospital management throughout the region. Despite these achievements, he never distanced himself from patients. Even as an administrator, Al-Razi continued to walk the wards daily. He listened to complaints, checked on progress, and encouraged his physicians to ask questions. To him, leadership meant presence, not authority. His dedication earned him loyalty from staff and trust from patients. People believed that if Al-Razi was in charge, they were safe. Under his administration, hospitals became centers of healing, learning, and scientific progress, places where the poor and wealthy alike could find comfort and care. This transformation had a profound impact on the world. His hospital systems influenced institutions in Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba. European travelers later described these hospitals with astonishment, noting their cleanliness, organization, and compassion. Many of the principles Al-Razi established, ward separation, medical records, trained staff, sanitation, outpatient care, and ethical guidelines, would not appear in Europe until the Renaissance. Through his leadership, Al-Razi proved that science was not only a method, it was a responsibility. He built systems that protected the vulnerable, elevated medicine, and preserved human dignity. He showed that healing required both intellect and empathy. And he demonstrated that true progress comes not just from discovery, but from beyond the hospital walls. Al-Razi found inspiration in a different world, one filled with fire, minerals, metals, and strange transformations. This was the world of early chemistry, still known then as alchemy, a field crowded with mystics who searched for magical elixirs and secret formulas. But Al-Razi did not seek magic. He sought understanding. He entered the laboratory not as a dreamer searching for gold, but as a scientist searching for truth. In his laboratory, rows of glass vessels caught the light, their shapes unlike anything most physicians had ever seen. He used alembics for distillation, crucibles for heating minerals, and retorts for chemical reactions. He cataloged each tool, describing its purpose and the principles behind it, creating one of the earliest manuals of laboratory operation. He studied substances with the same precision he applied to diseases. When he heated minerals, he documented how their color changed. When he distilled plants, he noted the qualities of each extract, its scent, its strength, its medicinal effect. His observations helped classify substances as acids, alkalis, and neutral compounds, and he identified the reactions that occurred when these substances interacted. These discoveries made Al-Razi one of the founding fathers of early chemistry. Yet even in chemistry, he fought superstition. Many alchemists claimed to possess secret formulas handed down from ancient masters. They spoke of mystical transformations and guarded their knowledge with dramatic secrecy. Al-Razi exposed these tricks. He warned that true knowledge must be shared openly, not hidden behind mystery. He criticized charlatans who preyed on the gullible and insisted that every experiment must be repeatable by any honest scholar. He developed strict experimental rules: measure carefully, heat gradually, document thoroughly, repeat constantly. For Al-Razi, the laboratory was not a place of magic. It was a place of discipline. His chemical studies improved medicine as well. He learned to produce highly purified alcohol, which he used to disinfect wounds long before germ theory explained why it worked. He experimented with antiseptic oils, ointments, and balms, documenting their effects on burns and infections. He identified toxins and warned physicians about their dangers, saving countless lives. He also introduced new medical ingredients, compounds derived from sulfur, mercury, zinc, and mineral salts. Some were dangerous, and he handled them with caution. Others became essential treatments for skin diseases, wounds, and respiratory issues. His balanced approach, neither reckless nor fearful, set standards for pharmacology and toxicology. Al-Razi's laboratory notebooks reveal a mind that saw no boundaries between disciplines. Medicine, chemistry, physics, and philosophy were all connected by one principle: truth must be discovered, not inherited. He taught his students that the natural world followed laws, not magic. If something burned, it did so for a reason. If a substance healed a wound, the effect came from its physical properties, not from mystical energy. This clarity helped transform chemistry into a rational science. But his experiments also carried risks. One story speaks of an explosion that injured his eyes, an accident caused by volatile chemicals. Some say this event began the deterioration of his sight, a condition that worsened in old age. Even as his vision faded, he continued to write, teach, and research, refusing to abandon the pursuit of knowledge. His enemies mocked him, claiming the accident was punishment for questioning ancient masters. But Al-Razi dismissed their taunts. To him, science required courage. A broken vessel, a failed experiment, or an injured eye mattered less than uncovering truth. In his commitment to experimentation, Al-Razi stood centuries ahead of his time. He rejected magic, exposed fraud, and replaced secrecy with documentation. He transformed laboratories into places of learning, not superstition. And through his chemical innovations, he brought medicine closer to the modern world. By the time his laboratory work was complete, he had built bridges between disciplines that would guide scholars for generations. He proved that nature could be understood through reason, tested through experiment, and explained through writing. And he showed that science thrives when it refuses to hide behind mystery. As the years passed, Al-Razi's influence reached every corner of the Islamic world. His books filled libraries, his students led hospitals, and his ideas began shaping the future of medicine and science. Yet with fame came controversy. Al-Razi had always challenged old ideas, questioned revered authorities, and rejected superstition. These actions brought him both admiration and enemies, especially in his later years, when his courage to speak out only grew stronger. Many scholars respected him deeply, but others saw him as a threat to tradition. They accused him of undermining ancient philosophers, especially Galen, whose authority had remained unquestioned for centuries. When Al-Razi pointed out errors in Galen's writings, supported by his own clinical observations, some critics reacted with hostility. They could not accept that a Persian physician could improve upon the teachings of classical masters, yet Al-Razi refused to retreat. He believed that respecting the past did not mean worshiping it. If evidence disproved a theory, he considered it an act of intellectual honesty to correct it. This bold attitude earned him the admiration of young scholars who sought freedom from intellectual stagnation. But it also made Al-Razi a target for jealous rivals. Stories spread of a confrontation in which a scholar threw one of Al-Razi's books at him during a debate, striking his face. Others whispered that he had angered religious authorities by rejecting mystical explanations for disease. Whether all these stories are true or exaggerated, they reveal one truth. Al-Razi lived a life unafraid of conflict. For him, truth mattered more than reputation. Meanwhile, his eyesight continued to deteriorate. Years of reading, writing, and laboratory work strained his vision. The chemical accident that injured his eye earlier in life had accelerated the decline. Despite this, Al-Razi continued to dictate books, discuss cases with students, and receive visitors who sought his wisdom. Even blindness could not extinguish his desire to learn. In these final years, he wrote some of his most personal works, books on ethics, philosophy, and the responsibilities of physicians. He emphasized compassion, humility, and moral integrity. He urged young doctors to treat the poor with respect, to admit uncertainty, and to pursue knowledge for its own sake, not for fame or wealth. One of his most striking beliefs was that a doctor must care for a patient's emotional and psychological health, not just their physical body. He recognized the connection between mental state and recovery long before modern psychology existed. He advised physicians to speak gently, offer reassurance, and build trust. His teachings turned medicine into a profession of empathy as well as expertise. As Al-Razi aged, Baghdad changed around him. New political tensions arose, new scholars emerged, and new debates shaped the intellectual world. But Al-Razi remained steadfast. Even when blindness prevented him from reading, he continued teaching through dictation. Students sat by his side, writing down his thoughts as he spoke slowly, remembering every detail of a lifetime in pursuit of truth. When he passed away in Rayy, his hometown, he left behind a legacy unmatched in its depth and influence. His books traveled across continents. His methods shaped hospitals from Persia to Andalusia. His courage inspired generations of scientists and physicians who dared to challenge accepted wisdom. And his insistence on evidence over superstition laid the foundation for modern scientific thinking. By the end of his life, Al-Razi had become more than a physician, more than a scholar, more than an innovator. He had become a symbol of intellectual courage, proof that truth can prevail even when surrounded by tradition, resistance, and fear. His work became the bridge between ancient medicine and the modern age, linking observation with reason and reason with progress. As he took his final breath, the world did not yet understand how monumental his contributions were. But time would reveal that his courage lit a path for all who seek knowledge, a path that leads out of darkness, toward understanding, clarity, and discovery. History remembers many conquerors, many rulers, and many warriors. But the men who conquer ignorance, who challenge fear, and who defeat superstition, they are far fewer and far more precious. Among them stands Al-Razi, a man whose weapons were not swords or armies, but observation, logic, and compassion. Long after his passing, his books continued to travel across continents. From the great libraries of Persia to the bustling academies of Andalusia, from the halls of Cairo to the medieval universities of Europe, his ideas spread silently through the centuries. Scholars who never saw his face, who lived in worlds far removed from his own, read his words with admiration. They recognized in him a mind unbound by fear, unshaken by authority, and undistracted by superstition. In Europe, Latin translations of his work became foundational texts. For more than 400 years, physicians studied his descriptions of diseases, his experiments with chemicals, and his instructions for ethical practice. They copied his techniques, adopted his hospital reforms, and embraced his insistence on honesty in medical documentation. Even without knowing his name, thousands of doctors practiced medicine shaped by his influence. But Al-Razi's legacy is more than scientific. He showed that reason can be compassionate, that science can be ethical, that knowledge can serve the poorest among us. He proved that a scholar's duty is not to preserve old ideas, but to refine them, to test truth against reality, to let evidence lead the way. And by doing so, he built a bridge between ancient medicine and the world we know today. When we look at modern hospitals, with their specialized wards, their patient records, their sanitation standards, their pharmacies, their rigorous training programs, we are looking at the echoes of Al-Razi's reforms. When we speak of clinical trials, ethical practice, and scientific honesty, we are speaking his language. When we reject superstition in favor of evidence, we are walking the path he carved 1,000 years ago. And perhaps his greatest legacy is the idea that knowledge belongs to all of humanity. He wrote for students, for doctors, for ordinary families, anyone who sought understanding. He broke down barriers between disciplines, refusing to limit himself to medicine alone. In every field he touched, chemistry, philosophy, ethics, he left behind principles that continue to shape our world. Yet the beauty of Al-Razi's story is not only in what he achieved, but in how he achieved it, with humility, with honesty, with courage. Even when attacked by rivals, even when blinded by injury, even when criticized for challenging ancient authorities, he never abandoned the pursuit of truth. His life teaches us that progress requires boldness, that discovery demands sacrifice, and that the world changes when one person dares to question what others accept without thought. Al-Razi did not merely challenge superstition, he defeated it, not through force but through clarity, not through anger but through wisdom, not through miracles, but through the quiet power of reason. And as long as science seeks answers, as long as medicine strives for truth, as long as humanity values knowledge, his light will never fade. Thank you for watching this full documentary on Al-Razi, a man whose courage reshaped the world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's greatest scientific heroes, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which legend we should cover next. Your support helps tactical legends bring forgotten history back to life. Until our next journey, stay curious, stay sharp, and keep the spirit of knowledge alive